I'm Christopher Kremmer. I'm currently Senior Lecturer in the Centre for Advancing Journalism at the University of Melbourne, and I'll be introducing our panel of writers tonight. I recently had the pleasure of reviewing the book we're here to talk about. I gave it a good review, not to say that that's why I've been asked to moderate the session, but it was in the back of my mind when I wrote it, but don't tell Jason Steger that. I praised the book not because of its politics primarily, but because, in my view, it succeeded as a work of art. We all know the arguments around the asylum seeker issue, and they don't bear repeating now. But essentially they boil down to, I guess, a paradigm question. Do we think of ourselves as a large, open kind of country, a country that welcomes the world's people from wherever they are, whatever their circumstances? Or do we feel that we need to have a more carefully controlled and managed country in the interest of perhaps getting a balance, perhaps a sustainable balance in the all-important area of immigration and, to a lesser extent, asylum seekers? Like so many problems, that's become a polarised debate, and we've ended up at war with ourselves over this important question. But the book we're talking about tonight, A Country Too Far, Writings on Asylum Seekers, takes a different approach, and it is a paradigm-shifting approach. The issue may be unavoidably political, but the approach is artistic. It persuades us of the importance of taking a humanitarian approach to the issue of asylum seekers, but it does so because it offers not arguments, but really artistic representations of the human condition. And it's in those details of human life, the thoughts that pass through the characters' minds moment by moment, their basic needs, their sensations and actions. In those representations, we recognise ourselves as fellow human beings. And that's where we make a bond with others, no matter what their race, religion or language. And to me, that's the true power of art and literature. To change the way we think by reminding us of what we share, that we are, in that sense, a team, if you like. It opens us to our better selves, which is so important when so much of life, of politics, of business, of ideology, is about organising us, dividing us, and making us compete with one another. So we're grateful to the Wheeler Centre, to Readings Bookshop and the Melbourne Centre of Pen, Poets, Essayists and Novelists, an international human rights group, if you don't know about it, that specialises in looking after oppressed writers. We're grateful to everybody involved in making tonight's event possible. And we have with us 3 at the moment, but we hopefully 4 by the fairly soon.
4 now.
4? Oh, well, I think we now have our 4th. Judith, come on up. The Melbourne traffic almost claimed another victim. Welcome, Judith. We have 4 of the 27 writers who contributed to A Country Too Far. One of them, Rosie Scott, co-edited the anthology with Tom Keneally, and they have put together a marvellous collection of fiction, poetry, memoir, reportage that conveys a really powerful sense of what it's like to be on the wrong end of the asylum seeker equation. So, speaking to their books tonight, we have, and I'll start in order, to my left, Rodney Hall, one of Australia's most accomplished novelists, a 2 times Miles Franklin Award winner, and the author of more books than there are contributors to this anthology, which is fantastic. Rodney's profoundly moving and beautiful story, Moonlight, opens this collection, and if you can imagine a father on a boat adrift at sea, in a big sea, cradling the head of his son in his lap on a leaky boat, wondering what the hell he's gotten them into, it gives you a sense of how powerful the opening to this book is, thanks to Rodney's contribution. Next in line, we have Arnold Zable, who needs no introduction to our audience tonight. Really a feature of the Melbourne literary landscape, a great supporter, in fact, I think the president of the Melbourne Pen Centre. So very committed author and also human rights activist. Judith Rodriguez, a poet who contributed I think, 5 poems to this collection. And, poetry really does just add so well and complement so well this collection. And finally, Rosie Scott, our author and editor, who's bringing up the rear there. So please give them a rousing Melbourne reception. Now I'm going to shut up, and each of the writers are going to speak to you. Maybe some will read, some will talk about aspects of the book or the issue. It's up to them. That'll take us through to about 7:20, when we'll open it for an open discussion, and then rest assured there'll be at least a quarter of an hour for questions at the end. Rodney, over to you.
Thank you. When I was invited, I had to say my first reaction was, how have we come to this? How, as a country, have we come to this disgraceful stage that we shrug off our responsibilities, we leave it to much poorer countries to bear the burden of this enormous diaspora of displaced people all over the world, the appalling suffering that they go through, and that it is reduced on our television sets to our odious politicians congratulating themselves on sending people back. Back to what? Back from us? Why? And so few of them. There was a time when, at the time of the Tampa, the number we were given, of course we're not given numbers now, but the numbers we were given were 4,000 in the year. And that, I lived in southern New South Wales, and that was the population of Bega. The idea of Bega being a threat to the rest of Australia and overrunning us. It's just it's ludicrous on one level, but it's so deeply shaming on another that it's hard to know where to begin. And the way we have managed to demonise everybody down the line, and most of all, of course, those who facilitate the asylum seekers. And that, if this were Germany in 1939, the people helping the refugees escape would be heroes. We've just put a context on it that has extracted ourselves from our own human values. And as a nation we've done it. I mean, the shaming thing is that the people, by and large, I hope not in this room, but the people, by and large, actually approve of this. And it's the challenge of when Rosie wrote to me first to say, would I contribute to it? My first reaction was, what can we possibly do? But of course, we have to do something. And one of the things that essential to what a writer does, is to put the reader into the inner life of our characters. And that's really what fiction is about, and it's why, to me, fiction is a higher form of literature than non-fiction, because it's you, the audience, who co-creates what the fictional work is. So rather than write a kind of polemical piece, which I was very tempted to do, as I'm sure we all were, I did decide on a piece of fiction. And I'll give you a little sample of what it is like, just to give you a little flavour of it. It's called Moonlight. Afloat on the empty night, it is the sea itself that amazes him. The sea is a place of the living. There are no dead here. Gazing around, entranced and awestruck, he murmurs under his breath, but the words of his landlocked language do not seem adequate. There is so much sea. Even as a modern educated man, he is unprepared. He can hardly breathe for the jostle of a million dancing moon shards, programmed to rise and subside with breathtaking restlessness. Thus the strange name ocean, perhaps strange in every tongue, delivers for him at last its reality, the greatest beauty of creation. Nothing else on earth so vast or dazzling, not rivers, not lakes, nor even snow-covered mountains. As for the promised destination, somewhere remote on the far side of night, beyond the glittering floor, well, he clings to his belief because the need is overwhelming. Easy to believe whole nations of refugees have successfully passed this way, unharmed, escaped without trace into the twinkling emptiness. Sea near and sea far. Waves interlocked and heaving with sinister elasticity. Sinister? No, he corrects himself. This is at last an interval of hope. Himself almost at peace, he gazes over the side to glimpse past glassy fractures a liquid abyss, always and forever the abyss. Seen now and then for an instant only, water vertiginous as the inverted sky in that towering transparency. Triggered alarm flashes lightnings through his uprooted tree. He recollects an ancient warning against casting oneself on the water. Defiantly he has done so. They have done so. The moon, heavy as marble and miraculously airborne, hurtles overhead.
Rodney, thank you very much. It was beautiful. Arnold Zable.
I must say I feel devastated at the moment, and I feel devastated because at this moment in time, there are people on Manus Island who are in hell, and the relevance of that to our discussion tonight is that we can't see them. There's no human face. They've been locked away. The great hope was out of sight, out of mind. And but human beings, there comes a point when they scream, and there comes a point when they are in utter despair, and they make their voice heard. The desperation of the people on Manus Island is extreme. What is happening to them is a crime against humanity, and it is immoral. Hugh Mackay wrote recently, why not call our asylum seeker policy what it is, immoral? It's immoral because it treats people who have committed no crime as if they were criminals. It's immoral because it fails to honour the most basic of all moral principles, treat others as we ourselves would wish to be treated. We have become participants in a tragedy that will attract as much opprobrium in the future as the stolen generations and white Australia do now. Having chosen to act immorally, we are setting ourselves up not only for international condemnation, but also for massive compensation claims in the future, and no doubt, yet another hollow apology to the thousands of people we have abused because we adopted that tacky mantra, whatever it takes. That's the policy now, whatever it takes. And once you go down the slippery path of the ends justify the means, you end up with those events that are taking place now. So, with just the 5 minutes at my disposal, I just want to say that what this book is all about is putting a human face to it. And in my case, I guess the story Zara's Lullaby was such that I couldn't choose fiction. I had to choose non-fiction because the non-fiction was so powerful that I felt that to turn it into fiction would be to abuse the story of one of the civic survivors that I'd come to know over a period of 10 years that I still see regularly, and I'll just leave you with the specific image that drives the story of Zara's Lullaby. You see, it takes a long time to get to know someone. I mean, I began writing about Faris not long after I met him in 2002. He's one of the 7 survivors of the 45 of the survivors of the Civex who settled in Australia. 7 settled in Australia, 45 worldwide, and 3 in Melbourne. He was one of the 3. And even after I'd known him for 8-9 years, it's just becoming a friend, entering into a deep relationship. So you're sitting in the living room of his flat in Carlton, Housing Commission flat, and his wife, he remarried, he lost his wife and his daughter to the sea. They disappeared from his arms into the sea, and he's sitting there, and his wife, amazing woman, it's a love story too. She says, he sings a lullaby to his daughter every night, almost every night. So of course, this is what Primo Levi calls an eloquent episode. It's so powerful that it can shift your perception. It takes you to the heart of the matter. Here is a man who risked everything and lost his precious daughter. And when I actually wrote the article originally for The Age and then I finally adapted it for the book, but when I originally wrote it, I said to him, I read it to him the night before I was going to send it off to make sure he was happy with it, and he said, look, I've got one request only. Can you put Zara's photograph in The Age in the article too? And so for him it was important to have his daughter honoured in this way. But can you imagine the horror of it all? And I'll end by saying that I said to him, would you do it again? Would you do the same thing again? He said, there's no question of it. He said, I was a stateless man for 21 years. For 21 years I lived in, I was a nobody. And so there are some things that are worse than death. And I can say now that what the people are experiencing on Manus Island may fall into that category. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Judith Rodriguez. And I believe, are you going to read, Judith?
I'm going to say something, then I'm going to read.
Okay.
Yes. I'm particularly pleased tonight to see that Peter Job is here, who worked so hard in our initial efforts for asylum seekers. Now, I sort of joined this event in person when I went to the Baxter Centre, Detention Centre, for the launch of the book that was previous to this one. And on that day, the Iranian prisoner, Mr. Golipur, had been released. Now, that was a shameful place, and I'm very glad it was torn down. It was horrible. This tin set of boxes in the desert, practically desert. The people from nearby Whyalla, mind you, were being marvellous. They had got helpers, but it was shameful to see. But at least it was on our land. It was not relegated to a place that Australians apparently believe are our fiefs. Nauru and Papua New Guinea are independent nations. I don't know what they see themselves as. They're performing services for money. Why we have to copy the Guantanamo initiative, I do not know. If you want to do something dirty, do it on your own territory. It strikes me that the white Australia policy has never died, that a lot of what people are thinking is simply a continuation of that, and we ought to scotch this snake before it goes a bit further. Right through this affair, I have thought there are murderers in departments in Canberra, and nobody will ever prosecute them. They move on. They leave it to Scott Morrison to look like somebody who would be eligible as commandant of Auschwitz. I don't know why he has chosen to take the extreme version of his role. All I can feel is that we have no attitude but one of complete abasement before these people we have abused, And one thing, I do not know why the United Nations hasn't expelled us, since we have contravened a convention which we signed. Having said that, I will read 3 of my poems. One of them goes back as far as the Tampa, but yes, it is relevant to the place where these people are now living out or dying in pursuit of their ambitions, of their aspirations. A lot of, like Arnold, I feel one has to stick as close to the facts as possible, and for me the facts are in the newspaper, I guess. So some of these are based on extracts from The Age. The first one's Tampa. Captain Arne Renan looked down on the deck. You could see it from the bridge. They started to be restless, started looking at the stars. The wind direction changed. Everything changed. This was, of course, the orders of the Australian government. On deck in the dark, between containers, families are asleep. They have passage. Outcast panic is past and shipwreck past. God's compass is set for the ancient land of beach, Australia. High on the bridge, their world's heartbeat, God can glance down stories to the pit. His hand to save, his will to landfall holds firm. They sleep. Till a shadow crosses the screens, the contrary will clamps its hand on his. And these know, who learn to steer by stars, smelt winds, do not forget powers that change course, that coerce and condemn. Lost or saved, turning in their sleep in the belly of the whale, the ship's turning wakes them. They know it all. Their universe turns in the waters, and the continents turn to inurn them. Their lit beach of the captain's will to save flares and recedes, bleeds a trace into voids of hate, is gone. They rouse, they leap up. Round them powers move, tides of legislation rise on the expensively shod and exercised feet of politicians, in the artfully pitched and liquored tones of politicians, in the skateboard arena minds of politicians, making their mark, keeping their footing, saving their skins, fighting the gradients of the electoral chicane, turning their trick and professionally mouthing family, chanting security, painting a picture about difference. And however the people rail and insist on a course, and however the captain in his honour prevails in his course, they are lost on these seas and this sand, and for long, long, under the lash of chance, they will find no landfall, beached in a container for as many years as it takes, the scorn of commandants in Australia. The second one, called The Asylum Seekers, is an address to them. Bearing your loss, however you can, in fear of hope, to our fearful ports. No place, my abasement. Your cry in my hearing, your children, the salt waste, these depths, these deaths, my abasement. Your feet in my shallows, your hands at my shore, my guns at your face, inquisition, no place. Your plea in my ear, your need in my sight, rights and denial, undoing of lives, no place. My guards in your path, your grief in my soul, the pledges broken, time passing, my abasement. The third one I'll read is the most recent, and it's called There Are No Words for This. I was trying to find a title for it, and I thought, well, Goya did it many times as a statement about the disasters of war. There are no words for this. Let the young man hang. Let children lose their trust. Let them despair and run amok and send them back. Let the woman lose hold of her child on the deep among known bodies. Let oceans take as flotsam these lives. 1835, a captain, saved, leaves his ship full of women to drown off Boulogne, not one alive, not one taken off. His orders being to land them in New South Wales. What's changed? Let oceans take them, or slavers, or years damn them. It's simple, they're different. Plus, illegals, they chose their fates. There are words for it, human waste. And the words for us?
Rosie Scott.
Welcome. It's wonderful to see such a capacity crowd here in Melbourne. I just want to quickly thank a few people. Thanks to PEN members, Readings and the Wheeler Centre for organising this, the two Christines, Gordon and Mackenzie respectively, of Readings and PEN, Mark Rubos, Simon Abrahams and the staff of the Wheeler Centre for putting on this terrific event, which apparently sold out some weeks ago. And many thanks to Penguin, Kate Blake, and Ben Ball, Maria and Heidi, as well as all the staff there for producing such a beautiful book, and thanks to Judy Buckridge. In August 2012, as the race to the bottom between the two parties intensified and the misinformation about asylum seekers kept coming, I made the decision that an anthology on asylum seekers could be a way of contributing another perspective to the ever-increasingly acrimonious treatment of the subject by politicians and spin doctors. Bearing in mind the success of our last collaboration, Another Country, the PEN anthology of detainees writing, I asked Tom Keneally if he would like to co-edit again, and was thrilled when he said yes. It was a risk for several reasons. With only one subject to write about, the pieces had the potential to be very repetitious. Your comment that they could all be just, very political. And we also were very unsure about how many writers would have the time or inclination to contribute to it, given their incredible work schedules. In the event, we were amazed at the response. Our list of writers is quite extraordinary and possibly unique, according to Steve Romay, the literary editor of The Australian. Not only that, but the creativity they brought to bear on this poignant subject was really beyond our wildest hopes for the anthology. All these writers were very much motivated by their strong feelings about the treatment of asylum seekers in Australia, and this translated into some of the most beautiful and powerful Australian stories and articles I've ever read. These stories, like all good literature, show the depth and relevance of the subject of asylum seekers in every facet of our lives and allow us to experience their suffering. There were personal disclosures too. The revelation that both Sue Wolfe and Geraldine Brooks had fathers who were illegal overstayers. The sad story of Judith Wright's friendship with a Jewish student just before the war, whom she left and didn't help and was always haunted by that. Les Murray's beautiful poem inspired by his wife's experience as a refugee. To quote from the introduction, the idea of this anthology was to ask our best writers to bring a different perspective and depth to the public debate on asylum seekers. The language of this discussion has been debased to such an extent that spin doctor flacks and people on the extremist fringes of Australian politics are largely responsible for the tone and direction of one of the central moral issues of our time. Even senior politicians have used inflammatory and inaccurate descriptions. Detainees throw their children overboard, they are terrorists and fraudsters. People smugglers are lower than pedophiles. The fact that they are talking about the most marginalised people on earth, deeply traumatised refugees who have lost their countries, homes and families through disasters of every kind, is lost in the storm of venom and cliché. We believe that the best writers can get to the heart of things in a way that almost no one else can because of the truthfulness, power and clarity of their language. We were looking for these qualities in our choice of writers, and the result has been extraordinary. Some of Australia's most distinguished novelists, poets and thinkers have focused their forensic intelligence on this issue. What has become clear from these writers is that the Australian attitude to asylum seekers, their down-to-earth personal experience of it, is quite different from that of the artificial world of spin and of online trolls. The stories and poetry in this anthology confirm that the seeking of the experience of seeking asylum, the terrible journeys of escape from death, starvation, poverty and terror to an imagined paradise are part of our mindset and deeply embedded in our culture and personal histories. In this rich anthology, the writers have made their contribution to the debate by addressing the lives of refugees with truthfulness and grace. Their stories show how closely our own histories mirror those of asylum seekers and how our fate is only a heartbeat away from theirs. End of quote. A Country Too Far is now on at least one best-selling list. The Penguin is now reprinting, and there are 18 events, past and future, celebrating it throughout Australia, all of which have so far sold out books and tickets. It has certainly hit a nerve. If you look at our Facebook page, you'll see the amazing reviews we've received and the story of how it has inspired a UK sister volume which has attracted top British writers. In his stunning review of the week in the Sydney Morning Herald, Christopher Kremmer wrote, "Can literature help to recalibrate a nation's moral compass? And can one book elevate a nation's conversation with itself above the roar of intolerance and abuse? Big questions, and no doubt overly ambitious ones, but A Country Too Far constitutes an important contribution to a great moral issue of our time. There is in these contributions a palpable sense of the writer's higher duties to truth-telling and bearing witness, and to the better lights of human nature, but not at the expense of art. There is a passion about this book and a moral, emotional and artistic synergy that makes for deeply satisfying reading. It is as if the contributors have themselves felt dispossessed, not of their land, but of the idea of their own country, and have seized the opportunity to reclaim it. If only they could write well enough, their words might break through the barbed wire barricades and island prisons that embody Fortress Australia." End of quote. The present suffering of asylum seekers in our country is insupportable by anyone who has a heart. A detainee in Manus Island told a friend of mine on the morning of the attack that there was blood everywhere after the recent terrifying attack where detainees were left utterly unprotected. He said the locals were very hostile to the detention centre being on their island and always have been. These appalling events on Manus Island are a direct result of Australian government policy, and that blood is on their hands. I hope each of you might consider buying an extra copy to send to a politician, or if you think that's a waste of time, to someone you think is an opinion maker and who might make a difference. And once again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much to all of you. Before I forget, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. It's a kind of ironic resonance given the sort of subject we're talking about today. Who owns this country? Who controls this land? Who authorises our presence? All live issues at the moment. We've rather eaten into our time for discussion, naughty writers, which is often the case. I suppose we might just get if there's one question we could try to answer here. We've heard the passion and deeply felt. But is there a moral obligation to at least respond to the question which has been at the core of the politics and essentially an argument that has been, at least at the political level, won by the coalition, which is that it's not asylum seekers we're against, it's people smugglers and the oft-quoted figure that 1,000 people have died making this journey, and that we have a moral obligation to try to somehow, probably with some sort of disincentive, persuade people not to make this journey. I would like anybody who has feelings about that question to tell us your thoughts.
This is a comment, an idea that can only be real to people who have absolutely no imagination of the circumstances under which people undertake such a journey.
There is in the book a marvellous piece by Robin de Crespigny from an extract from a novel of hers, which is about a people smuggler and the resilience of the people smuggler in finding ways of getting his clients around barriers and police blocks and so on. It's a terrific piece.
I just add to that anyone with any knowledge of the history of seeking asylum, which is a very long history, centuries long, knows that if you're going to run, you go to the person who can help you, and they're not necessarily the nicest of people. Although when you look at who people smugglers are, there's a vast spectrum from the Sugaharas and the Schindlers all the way through to the real scoundrels. But you do what you have to do to escape, and by any means possible. One comment I want to add to that is it's interesting. Again and again last year, politicians got up on Parliament and cried, about the fact that we're doing this because people are drowning at sea, and we saw it again on Q&A last about a week ago. Several people, they came out with the moral indignation. We're doing it because we don't want to see people drown at sea, but not one word of empathy about the people who are sleeping in tents in 40 to 50 degrees heat, who are living in a kind of hell on Nauru and Manus Island. Not one word of empathy or compassion for the 30,000 of people now living in limbo and having no work rights, having no access to Medicare, being totally dependent upon charity. People who, as studies are showing, are now in mass proportions suffering from depression, demoralisation, post-traumatic stress syndrome, all of that. Never do we hear any of that. If I heard that as well, then I could say, OK, I understand your concern. And so I think a lot of those tears were bogus.
Could I ask another question? When comes the politician who has the vision to try to awaken the Australian people to humane values?
Indeed. What about... I'm playing devil's advocate here. Hope in a situation like this. I was walking here this evening past St Paul's Cathedral, and we're obviously not at one as a country about this issue. There are deep cleavages, and different sides to our personality seem to be kind of accentuated according to the circumstances, the context. Australia, I don't believe, is any longer a predominantly intolerant country. I don't think that the evidence suggests that. And yet, if you push the right button, if you frame an issue in a certain way, it tends to bring out a different side of us. But I guess the question I would ask is, one sometimes senses that in our anger, or the anger that people feel about this issue, there is a kind of defeatism, a sort of almost a loss of hope about this country. Is that justified, or could you just as easily look at this issue as an opportunity for Australia to have a good fight?
Well, I actually often mention this in speeches. In fact, there are something like over 100 grassroots organisations to help asylum seekers. There's one of the biggest movements in Australian political history with the kind of work that advocates have done solidly for 15 years. Thousands and thousands of Australians have really worked some full-time on helping asylum seekers in every way, lobbying, giving them comfort, taking them phone cards, resources. So my view is, and I've been involved in this for 10, 15 years myself, and to me it fills me with a great deal of hope and joy in Australian people. I think that my view, very roughly, which probably would not go down well with a sociologist or anyone else, is that it's sort of 40-40. There's 40% who are pretty well on our side, there's 40% who aren't going to change, they're all pretty rusted on, and there's 20% that actually swing with the tides. And because we have not had one leader in the major parties ever to say this is wrong, we aren't getting that leadership where the swinging voter can actually feel that there is a sense of a kind of moral path. So I think I personally, in spite of all the horrific nature of the government policy and what they're doing to asylum seekers, I feel there are many, many people who oppose it, and I feel very hopeful about their work.
Now, I'd add also that one organisation that I'd single out is the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre here in Melbourne. And interestingly enough, when they have evenings, where they brief volunteers, up until recently the numbers that would attend are about 700. But I think the most recent meeting they had to shift it to the Melbourne Town Hall. I think there were almost a couple of thousand people who were volunteering, who wanted to volunteer. So it's an extraordinary organisation.
And they can receive tax-free deductions on donations.
Great. Well, at that moment, I think it's probably the time to turn over to you, the audience. There are helpful and industrious ushers on either side of this very long room. So I can already see a hand, and I'll leave it to the professionals to get the microphone to you.
I read in The Guardian yesterday after the events at Manus Island, I think it was by Jeff Sparrows, and at the very end he said that the bottom limit of our lowly policies are only going to be limited by what Australians are willing to bear. And I'm wondering what you believe we are capable of bearing.
I think this is interesting because it seems to me that it's part of a very strange phenomenon of us in the past, say, 20 years, regarding ourselves as hard done by, that we kind of think we can't afford anything any longer. And the idea that we once had absolutely free health service, absolutely free tertiary education, is completely scotched now. It's like it never was. And yet the country is richer than ever. I mean, I think it is actually part of the astonishing speed in which the divide between the super rich and everybody else has made us all feel that we are actually hard up against it. We ourselves are doing it hard. I mean, any of us who travel know how wrong that is compared to almost every country in the world. We are marvellously privileged. But I do think there is a general feeling out there that we haven't, the bottom we haven't reached because we ourselves are having a bad time.
So does she mean that what kind of atrocities can we bear? Is that what you meant? How far what kind of injustices can we bear? Is that what you meant?
I think that's right.
Yes.
We can bear anything at a distance. If these people were on our land and therefore accessible, I think there'd be more fuss.
Oh, and we can deny it because, a photograph of somebody with calloused hands with blisters and so on from he is not accepted as evidence and is denied on the basis that even putting it on air is un-Australian. I mean, there's a block there, a massive block that is, it's to do with we behave as if we're a frightened people. We're sort of callous and frightened, and we were never like that. I mean, it's the opposite of what Australians are really like. It's just a mystery to me how this has been so foisted on us. The media, of course, have a big part to play with in this, but it's been very successfully foisted on us that we're up against it ourselves.
But I suppose I'm just wondering, the awfulness of that question is, what kind of atrocities are Australian people going to go on accepting? And will the atrocities get worse and worse?
Well, we have a death today.
Yes. This is a most terrible thing today. What else could happen?
My point with that, Rosie, is that there's a mindset that discounts it. It's not that we're that we're accepting the atrocities and how bad they are. We're denying the atrocities.
So we'll put up with it.
So we just get on with whatever else we're doing because we put that behind us. It isn't really happening. And every time you hear something else that's awful, you think, oh, no, that's not really happening. And that's why those shots of the people drowning off the boat were so traumatic to the public, because that was totally confronting. And no one was going to say they weren't drowning.
Yes, Next question.
Hi, I'd just like to say ASRC is a wonderful place, most incredible experience of my life volunteering there, so highly recommend it. But the politicians and the media have done so well at constructing asylum seekers as the other, and I do think it's very important, the humanising element, you know, like documentaries like Devil in the Deep Blue Sea and the movie Mary Meets Muhammad and things like your work, but I don't think they reach the right audience, you know. I'll keep on reading them because this issue's my life, but what about the people that won't read them and won't watch those movies? How do we get the message to them?
Look, I think that's a very important question. It's easy to preach to the converted, and the real challenge is how do you get through to people who may not disagree with you, and we need to enter into discussion. We need to engage people. I've noticed, when you put up something on Facebook, I put up something on Facebook yesterday as part of many people are doing it, various campaigns going on, protests being planned, but then I noticed that in the string of comments there's always one or two people that speak with great anger, and that anger doesn't help. That moral indignation coming at people doesn't help. And I remember back 10 years ago giving a talk to an audience where everyone was in agreement with what I said, and I gave a fiery speech, but I noticed that, and everyone cheered, but at the end, or towards the end, about 10 people walked out, and I thought, well, those 10 people, what about those 10 people? And as chance would have it, a couple of weeks later, I was asked to address a Rotary gathering, and in the audience there were people that had various views, and I thought, well, how do I go about this? And then when I finally, this is how I began. I said, in the 1840s, an American journalist and social reformer travelling through Ireland noticed that the people's lips were green, and they were green because they were eating grass, and they were eating grass because there was nothing else to eat. And out of a population, this was the great potato famine, and out of a population of 8 million, over 1 million died, and over a million got onto boats. And within 2 decades, 3 million out of 8 million had left that country, and the 15 million who left the British Isles in the second half of the 19th century were the largest diaspora of modern times. And so I could feel a shift in that audience, and I've used examples like this ever since in those sort of audiences. So we need to engage, we need to try and get across that we are a nation of Indigenous people and boat people. These are the two great narratives. We need to keep at this. And one of the things that I'm pleased about is that A Country Too Far is actually being adopted in school curricula and being discussed at the school level. So, this is what we've got to keep on trying to do, is to keep engaging.
And I do think that's a common question, and I do think there are some people that are never going to change their minds. And so there is absolutely no point in wasting time, because time's too short. But of those who are open to it, that the idea with this book was that it would be mainstream, that we'd get it into schools and universities, and try and the authors who have contributed to it are much loved by many Australians, and I think that helps to get it into a bit of more of a mainstream than closed.
And just further to that, I'd like to add that I think that you have those we keep out, but you also have those we leave behind. And I think that the two groups are inextricably linked, and that to have a discussion or an argument about this issue, it's important that it not be held in isolation, particularly of the social trends, the things that are happening in our society more generally, which you've referred to. And so, for example, I think if we are, through our economic model, creating a larger and larger number of people who are fairly marginalised economically, maybe kept kind of passive by Chinese white goods and welfare handouts. And nevertheless, they are the most likely audience to be receptive at some level, I think, to these messages of hate. And so I think if we're really going to tackle some of these issues, we need to try to reconstruct a kind of philosophical position that is more coherent than the sort of bitsy sort of politics of contemporary left politics.
And also, of course, we have a paper, a media that's almost totally owned by Murdoch. and everybody reads that. Everybody reads the
me.
Daily Telegraph, and that's a very simple but totally cogent point.
Well, the left did try to get it right with education, but that is being torn up, as we see.
Questions? We've got time for a couple more, actually. There was a hand down the front at one point. You'd almost given up. See? Don't give up. That's the message of tonight.
One way up the back too, Chris.
Yes.
As you can see, I'm a very old man, so I have knowledge of refugees. I'm a former refugee. And I see myself as a refugee to this day because it leaves a trace. Now, my question is, how can we continue to accept all this nastiness without recoiling and saying that this is so close to the most atrocious things that have happened in the world that we really need to stop and think about it. Now, I man some stalls for Refugee Action Collective, so I do talk to a large number of people in the streets. And what strikes me is that hope lies in ignorance. There is so much ignorance about this issue. And if you can somehow distill in very simple terms how atrocious it is to do what we are doing, and your book, and I'm returning to my experience, does that, and it's very heartening that it is going to be available in schools. And returning to my experience, every piece in that book I can relate to, because every piece in that book brings up something that is important in this context, and it humanizes the experience of the refugee. And I would defy anybody who has a heart to read this book and not to be moved by it.
Thank you. I'll take that as a comment. Yes.
Oops. I just want to thank you, all the writers and the intellectuals, because I kind of feel that a part of my life is in that book, because I am a boat person, and I came here in 2010, December, and I have seen a lot of bad stuff on the ocean. I spent 8 nights and 9 days on a leaky boat, I would say, and the drowning, the experiences that I have seen and I have experienced, I can never forget about them. And only if I could put them into pictures, I wouldn't be able to even do that. I can't really brief my whole journey in a couple of minutes or in an hour, because the nights, the days, and the people, the families, the kids of 3 months old, just from 3 months old to 17 years old, people on the boat, it was the most horrible experience of my life. And to take that picture out of my mind, it is not possible for me. But the only request I have from the community, from the public here, and from the intellectuals and writers and others is to just give hope to the people who are in Manus Island, because I totally can feel how they feel there, because I was locked up for about 18 months, and I've seen, experienced, and talked to the people who would look down on you, and they would just count you as a useless person. So I totally understand where the people in Manus Island or Nauru or Christmas Island, where they're coming from. And
I I think we might just have to draw a line there.
Sure, definitely. And about I understand a lot of people, if not in this room, in the community, they might think that these people are coming in this land, and they're on the Centrelink, they steal our money, they steal a lot of things. But these people who are leaving their countries, their families, their children, they're coming here for the safety of themselves and their families, and they all have the skills. It's not that when they get in here, they just sit at home, do nothing, and just do nothing at all. I myself, when I came out of the detention center, I received support from the humanitarian organizations for only 3 weeks, and from that point till now, I haven't received anything from the government except I've kept working. What I mean is these people who are coming here, they definitely have the skills if they were given the right to work and to study. Because we know that there are more than 30,000 people in the community who don't have the right to work, and who don't have the right to study. So what is the point of taking hostages? These people are basically hostages here because their families are in their countries, and they're waiting for them to support them, at least get them out of, let's say, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, you name it.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to say that we're under enormous time pressure and that we need to move on. Thank you very much for that. Obviously, there's so many things that could be said and are being said and will be said and will continue to be said about this
I thought
issue.
there was one thing that you said among many things that I think was very striking when you said that you'd like to put it into pictures. And I think that goes to the heart of what's at work in this collection. The word imagination, it comes from the word image. Imagination actually means seeing it. So whether it's creative non-fiction or fiction or in the form of poetry, it's the act of imagination is what is needed so desperately so that people can see, can hear, can taste, can smell the experience of the other, so that he is or she is no longer other, but is one of us.
It is a fight. And it's an important fight, and we shouldn't necessarily be afraid of having a fight if what's at stake is important. And for that reason, I'd like to thank the people who've given their time and their talent to this wonderful book, which will be on sale. Nobody's making any money out of this book. It's the authors and the editors of donating their winnings on this book, and it is very successful.
We are.
They are for sale at the back of the room, and I'd just like you to put your hands together and thank